Good afternoon, everyone in Europe. Welcome to our webinar. Today we have JeanAnn Harrison and Phil Lew. I'll introduce in a bit. And we're going to talk about better mobile testing for better user experience. This webinar is brought to you by Exposoft, a company dedicated to improving the software quality of its clients. We provide software quality assurance consulting and testing services. We have offices in San Francisco, Beijing, Oslo, and Amsterdam, where I am now. On XPO's site, we have two people. I'm on the right, Jan. I'll be handling the introduction, and we have Amy. Hi, Amy.
Hello.
I guess Amy is out. Amy will be handling the questions, so she'll be typing. If you have any questions, type them, and she'll try to fit them in when appropriate. One thing I'd like to get you guys informed on, next week we have a webinar with John Hager, also on mobile testing and embedded devices. Hope to see you guys there as well. Housekeeping, everyone is going to be muted throughout the webinar. Like I just said, if you have any questions, you should go to webinar control on the right side of your screen. We'll try to fit them in when appropriate. Otherwise, we'll have a separate Q&A session at the end of the webinar. Any questions that we can't fit in the webinar, we can answer afterwards via email. Also, a recording will be posted after the webinar, and you will get information on that. Okay, our speakers, Phil. Phil's the CEO of Exposoft. Phil, great to have you here.
Good to be here, Jan.
Okay, tell us a little bit about your mobile and especially your user experience.
User experience. Okay. Well, I've been working in user experience for the last 5 to 6 years, and actually did a good part of my PhD was on usability, which is a big part of user experience, and I've been using that in working with customers on improving their user experience of their software. And so it's exciting to see how that has transformed into people really worried about their mobile user experience, especially with the short attention spans of users. So I'm really excited about user experience. It's a hobby and a passion of mine.
Great, and we're interested to hear more about you. And you're a competitive biker, right?
Yeah, well, I'm a little old now, but I used to be. I'll say that. My body won't do what I want it to anymore.
Okay, well, thank you very much for being here. We're looking forward to hearing you speak. And our other speaker is JeanAnn. Jean is a mobile testing veteran. I would say a famous person in the industry. JeanAnn, great to have you here.
Hi, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Tell us a bit how you got involved in mobile and user experience.
Well, I've been in the mobile world now for about 7 years. And I originally started with testing the LAPD's ticket generator. So if you get stopped by a police officer in LA, you can thank me for getting a ticket. Those devices certainly were an interesting project. And then I moved on to medical device. And the interesting thing about that with user experiences is the type of device was a heart monitor, and that really required patients who received the heart monitor were generally elderly, not used to a mobile device. So we had to really pay attention to the GUI that was on that screen and how easy that was to be to use so the proper medical information could get to their doctor. So I've been doing just general mobile tablet and phones now for the last, I'd say the last few years. So it's been a journey of a lot of different experiences.
Okay, you're a big sports enthusiast as well, right?
Yes, very much an avid sports fan. Particularly with baseball, and I'm also a figure skater, and I'll be going on to my skating lesson after the webinar.
Okay. Great. Well, we have a great team. I'm very much looking forward to this webinar. JeanAnn, Phil, go ahead. I'll give the mic to you guys, and I'll mute myself. Success.
Okay. Well, again, welcome to this webinar. We're happy to be helpful to you all, and hopefully you can gain some information and especially inspiration in this presentation. So today's agenda, we're going to talk about the different types of devices and mobile apps. One of the problems we get is a misunderstanding of what's out there. So and then we'll talk about the definition of user experience, types of tests, examples of user experience tests, and we'll conclude it with some question and answers. Hopefully we can stay on track. Whoops. Let's go up. Okay. There we go. All right. So one of the things that I found in my experience is that people misunderstand what kinds of devices there are. So what I want to point out is, yes, there are mobile phones and tablets, but there are also proprietary devices like heart monitors and PDAs and GPS devices. There's also embedded software. So, you know, in your car, you have a computer system, you have software. So be aware of the different types of devices and embedded software that exists. And hopefully you'll get an opportunity, if you don't already, to work with them. And what we're going to talk about today are the different types of mobile applications. There are native applications, which we're going to put a lot of focus on, hybrid applications and web applications. What I wanted to point out is the differences. With a native application, it's local to the device, so you're not really tapping into another server. Sure, you're going to interact, you know, when you do, say, a search, or not necessarily search, but you're interacting with the internet. Facebook, for example, a Facebook app can be both a web app and it can be a hybrid app. But because you're interacting with different people on, say, for example, the Facebook app, then you're probably using or utilizing another server. But with a native app, say, you know, one of the things that I've been noticing lately are like insurance applications. For the most part, you'll get things downloaded onto your phone, but then you're pretty much using the phone. So it's native to the phone. It's local to the device. So you want to make sure that you know the differences between a native application, a hybrid application, and a web application. Okay.
Yeah, I think that it's kind of important to note that the type of application is really depending on the data that is used in the application. So, for instance, a native application may be something like a dictionary where the application initially downloads a set of words for you, and you use those words in your dictionary. And so it would be rather cumbersome for the application to go out to the internet, find whatever word you're searching for, and download it. And that kind of response time would be prohibitive to the user. And so the type of data and the updating of the data and the amount of data that is used really influences the type of mobile app that you're using.
Yeah, it's interacting with a server if you're dealing with web apps and hybrid apps, but native, it is all local. So even an online, or I should say a search with a dictionary, that would definitely be a search with the device itself. You're not interacting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. So now we're going to talk a little bit about the definition of user experience. What does it mean in general? And these words, I think, really help define what the user experience is. Is it useful? Do you find that this application is helpful to you? Can you find things? Is it easy to find and figure out where things are and where things exist? Is it accessible? Do you find it easy to access different functionality? Is it desirable? Is it valuable? So these are all words that are really important with the user experience. You know, desirable, of course, means, is it something you want to use? Is it something you'll continue to use? And that would be valuable. Is it valuable to your needs? And is it credible? Is it an authoritative bit of information or application for your needs? Usable. Can you use it? Is it easy to understand? So I know, Phil, you have some really great information about the definition of user experience. So
yeah, I think that underneath usable, one of the key characteristics, especially for mobile apps with the smaller screen, is it's easy to see. And so as sub-characteristics of that, you may have things like font size, contrast, placement on the screen, and as well. And also, one of the things that separates a user experience from usability is the performance. So performance is probably one of the most important things in the user experience, especially for a mobile device, because you certainly don't want your users sitting around waiting for things. I mean, you could have the most usable application and very high usability, but if you have poor performance, then the user has a very poor user experience. And I'd say probably the last part, which I know that you'll talk about later, is the learnability or the trainability of the application, and that can the user learn how to use your application very, very quickly, and is it intuitive?
Right.
So those things are probably the most very important as well.
Right. So this is where we're going to focus in on for the types of tests. Phil talked about, the look. Is the display easy to figure out? Is it easy to understand? Is it pleasant? For example, as Phil mentioned, that the text size, the font, though, that's something that we need to include in our tests. And one of the things that I think that I want to put a little bit of attention to is automation. And I'm sure I'm going to get questions about what is the best tool. Well, think about how would you be able to test the font of an application. How would you how would software be able to do that? And I personally don't know how that can happen. There are certain things that I've seen where some applications I've seen where, yes, they can test for a particular font. So they're looking for a font, but that's something that is not very common in the mobile world for automation. So it's possible, but I think it would be a very expensive automation tool to generate. So just be aware that, yes, there may be something out there, but it may not be worth your time to try and use. And then I want to talk about, user experience with tests, the different types of tests, feel, accessibility. So what kind of feel do you get using this particular application? Is it easy to use? Is it something that you like to use? That's a very important part of user experience. And again, Phil mentioned whether or not, it's something that can be done quickly. We get such a quick turnaround when it comes to downloading experience. If you can't download something, then you're going to probably have a problem with selling that application. And that, of course, goes into performance of whether or not the application performs well. We need to think about tests with regards to battery, and we need to think about tests with temperature. And I'll talk a little bit more about that and share an experience if you haven't heard it already, because I've talked about it many times. But I think it's an important part of mobile testing that we all need to think about as a general rule. and yet I still hear people who don't even consider it. It is extraordinarily important. Trainability, make sure that people understand that they can easily find things, that they can figure out. One of the problems that we see is people are going from one device to another device, and I know for myself, when I've tested the Facebook app on my phone versus my tablet versus my laptop, I have a hard time finding things because I don't understand what the icons mean. They're different. So be aware of these kinds of tests. Recovery of unexpected behavior. And I'm going to talk about this because I don't have many slides on this and I really want to focus on it. When you go ahead and you get weird errors, users need to understand how to be able to recover from it. So you need to think about when you are testing that if, to try and generate some errors and see whether or not your application does recover. And I've had a situation where the device didn't recover and yet the user didn't know they had to reboot. The device ran out of memory, and of course this was a medical device, which meant no heart data was getting to the doctor. And that, of course, can be a very dangerous situation. So you want to make sure that there is a way to recover that the user may or may not know. Okay, so Phil, how about you? Do you have any ideas that you wanted to share with these tests?
Yeah, sure. I think it's important to just keep a broader context of all these tests, and that the reason, first of all, you mentioned automation tools. And I think that, especially for the mobile platform, automation tools in this area are not really mature enough or not available. So really what we're talking about is doing an evaluation. An evaluation is a form of testing, evaluation of an application by inspection, which means that you just look at the application, you go through it as in a heuristic way, and evaluate the application, and you for instance, would take these 6 characteristics and define them such that you could say, you could assign a rating to each of these things, or sub-characteristics of these things. For instance, look and display, you could have a sub-characteristic such as, is the menu consistent, yes or no? And you would go through the application and give it a rating throughout a task that a user would perform, and in the end you would end up with an evaluation. So I think those just looking at this in a broader context is in terms of evaluating and getting some sort of a rating or a benchmark, and then using that benchmark as a way to improve.
Yes, very much so. I think that's a great way to try and get some of these tests in where you have real quantitative results.
Right. I mean, just like we were talking about the other day, JeanAnn, unless you have some kind of benchmarks and use these benchmarks as a way to improve, then otherwise we're just sitting around talking and drinking coffee, right?
Right, exactly. And we do need to work with our stakeholders to get those kinds of quantitative measurements so that we can understand what they are looking for, as well as what we know. We have an idea of what we want and how we would use, but it may be different.
I just want to add that it's not quantitative in terms of like gymnastics, a 9.9, but quantitative in terms of this area needs improvement, this area is okay, or this area is doing very well. So just kind of large buckets that we can use as a way to improve, because we definitely don't want to get bogged down in big numbers.
Right. Agreed. That's a really good point. We do need to get away from numbers in this instance and focus in on some definitions of what we want. Right. And I think that's one of the things that's really important with user experience, is to really understand what we mean by ease of use. I think we don't tend to really talk too much about that. We just say ease of use, but what does that mean? So we do need to have those kinds of definitions, and we need to work with our stakeholders to get those definitions.
Right.
And I think also, and I'm just going to mention real quick, a great way to do that is to put that in some sort of a table of sorts and say, okay, we're going to say this means this means that, and give people, and give people something that they can understand. It's really a great way to do it. Okay, so anyway, look, the displays. What we want to see is we want to make sure we test for text size, fonts of text, filling out the screen display surface, which is really important. You will see some examples where the screen is not filled out based on the way that maybe the particular device. When you're dealing with an application, for example, Twitter, what will happen with, say, an iPad might not be the same as with an iPhone. And so what we want to do is we want to make sure we test the different devices and fill out that screen as it's important. Colors and brightness are also very important. Okay.
JeanAnn?
So here's yes, Amy?
We have a question. How do you automate, or how do you test for people with color? How do you mobile test app for accessibility for people with color vision disability?
Ah, that's a great question.
And that's from Mohinder. Sorry if I'm not saying your name correctly.
I know Mohinder. Thank you for joining us, Mohinder. Okay, well, that's a really great question.
I can address that. I can address that, JeanAnn, if you like.
Thank you.
I think one of the ways to address that is with the colors and contrast, and using that as a characteristic. Or, for instance, the Bloomberg financial application gives you the option of using different colors, or using a white background with black letters, or vice versa. So one of the evaluation points that you could use if you were to develop an evaluation matrix would be something like that. You know, does the application enable you to change the colors such that a person who has difficulty in seeing different colors can use the application? And so, you know, you would say yes or no, or you might have something in between in terms of being able to change those color, a color switch of some sort.
Okay, great. I hope that answered Mohinder's question. Okay, moving on. Okay, so this, by the way, I want to take a quick note and thank Terry Charles and Mike Corwin for providing me with some extra screenshots that I needed for this webinar today. So here's a particular screenshot of an iPad mini. It's the Twitter homepage. And as you can see, if we were to consider the look of this screen, we can tell that it does not fill out the screen, but we want to talk about, you know, are the navigation buttons useful in terms of placement? Are they accessible? Is the font readable? Does the display fill out the screen? So all these questions are something that we want to ask ourselves based on what we view. And in this case, with the iPad mini, you know, I personally would say it doesn't fill out the screen. It is very much the same in terms of the navigation buttons as the iPad 2. And the iPad, I'm sorry, the iPhone has a little bit different view. So, so if you go ahead and you look at this screen and you say, is it likable? Is it something I would want to use? Is it easy? Those are all the questions that, again, we want to ask, but we want to ask with those particular definitions that Phil talked about earlier. So,
Yeah.
Phil, do you have some thoughts on this?
Yeah, I think you have some perfect examples here. We have iPhone 5, I think it was iPad mini and iPad 2. And one of the things that's really important that we work with our customers, our clients, is the consistency in the location of the buttons. You know, can the user find the buttons is a really big factor in that. Is the location of the buttons consistent across platforms? And so,
And as you see, that's not the case with the iPhone versus the iPad.
exactly. So, you know, that really helps a user to be able to use the application. Is it in the same place as it was before? Otherwise, they have to think, okay, I'm on this platform, I have to go over here to do this, which does, you know, create some confusion and delay. And the other thing is, in terms of the usability across platforms, is you could say the integratedness or the integration across platforms. So, for instance, if you take, you know, Netflix, for instance, and you have it on your iPad versus your TV versus your iPhone, you know, if you're watching a movie, then obviously the location of the buttons is going to change. But if you're watching a movie and you stop it on one platform and you want to continue on another platform, then those kind of characteristics should carry over from your user account, such that you don't have to start at the beginning of the movie again. So those kind of things really impact the usability of the screen as well.
And one of the things that we're finding now is people are not sticking to just one device. They are moving from device to device in their own experience. So we have to think about that when we are testing for this kind of usability, and whether or not it's easy to find things going from one device to another.
That's right. And, you know, actually, yeah, I was going to say that actually is a really good example of a differentiator between usability and user experience. You know, an application can be highly usable on what platform, or very usable on platforms as independent platforms, but across a set of platforms with one single application, if they're not consistent, then that really affects the entire user experience.
Right, right. So, and here we have the Kindle Fire example, and we have the Android phone. So as you can see, even just the navigation buttons on the top of the screen go very nicely with the iPhone, the Android. So that is very similar. Also, one of the things I wanted to point out is it fills out the screen for the actual display screen of the Kindle, as well as with the phone itself. So this is just something that, for me, as someone who uses the two devices, I personally prefer the Android, just because, again, I've been using it, so I'm comfortable with it. But that doesn't mean that, you know, the iPad or the iPhone would be better. It's a personal experience. And I think that's one of the things we need to consider when we're testing, is that we have to consider everybody, not just one set of users. Okay, feel and accessibility. So these are some of the tests that we need to think about. Navigation. Is it easy to navigate throughout the screen? Rotation of the screen is really important. Does it go from portrait to landscape? Can you set that setting? Those are some of the things that we need to think about. And does it fill out the screen based on going from portrait to landscape? As well as images and links reaching the same target grouped into one touch zone. So do those images appear as you would expect? Language. Do we go from English to Dutch to Polish to German, as we want that to happen. You know, some of the problems that I've seen with devices is that language is only accessible in certain languages, but yet they're selling the application. For example, if they don't have a Polish version, but yet they're selling the application in Poland. Is that accessible to Polish-speaking people? No, but they may speak English, they may speak German, they may speak other languages. The point is that we have to think about those kinds of tests. And again, is the functionality viewable? So let's see here. So here we have an example of the iPad 2 rotation of a Connect page. And what we want to talk about here is, if you notice, you've got the portrait side and you've got the landscape side. And my look of this is, again, the filling out of the screen is not something that I think is a very good view. I think it actually looks pretty poor based on, you know, the fact that somebody didn't test this properly for the landscape. So maybe they want it this way. Maybe this was something that they decided on. Phil, what about you? What do you think in general of this kind of test?
Yeah, I think that you know, when you think about designing for different platforms and across platforms, one of the things you think about is the location of the buttons and the consistency, as I mentioned before. Mm-hmm. And so, you know, this may have been designed on purpose this way, right? Because users are used to this. And so, you know, when you're designing a mobile application, you may think, okay, great, I think it would be better if I put these buttons on the top. And from a design point of view and from a raw usability point of view in designing an application, you may be correct. But from what a user is used to and what they may be accustomed to using across all of their mobile applications, you know, you may be incorrect in terms of making it easy for them to use. So in terms of looking at this, you know, filling out the screen, yes, I don't think that they did a good job at integrating across platforms and adapting to the different platforms. It seems to me like they would have been able to spread this across in the landscape view. But I think the button placement is good. I certainly would not have changed that. Right. And you mentioned something earlier in terms of is all the functionality viewable? And you know, when we're designing an application, you know, we don't want all of the functionality viewable. We want, because there's such a limited real estate for on a mobile screen, you know, we want the most common functionality viewable, and then we want the other functionality to be accessible in some way, but not necessarily viewable on that one particular screen. And I think that's where a lot of people get tied up, and especially when they convert over from a desktop application to a mobile application, is that they want everything to be available. And you know, the bottom line is that it just cannot be. And so we really have to think about the tasks that our users are executing on the mobile platform and make those top things available to them. And the other things, possibly they can, but not so easily.
Right, absolutely, and thank you for pointing that out. I agree 100%, and I should have made it a little bit more clear, but yes, only the most important functionality or the most used functionality should appear on the mobile screen, and but yet accessible so that people can get to the things that they might want to use.
Right. You know, that's not so important for something simple like Twitter. But if you have a fairly complex application, for instance, like Fidelity Investments, and you look at their website and you compare it to their mobile application, you can see that they really did a lot of thinking about what particular tasks and functions do we want on the mobile app versus the web app.
Well, what's interesting, even with Twitter, the other day I was trying to use Twitter, and I posted something and I didn't really like it, and I was using my mobile phone, and I was trying to delete it. And there are, menu buttons on the bottom. So they did consider deleting some, including certain certain functions that could be not necessarily hidden, not displayable. And that's, I think, what's important too, is that they're utilizing your device your device buttons to include within the application. And this is something that we do need to consider when we're testing for accessibility and feel.
Right.
And this is an iPhone page, the portrait. And what we found out, which was interesting, was the fact that the Twitter application is not viewable in a landscape view. So that's kind of interesting. And just as an FYI, the iOS 7 we did not test and we did not include in this discussion. So I cannot comment on iOS 7, but certainly with iOS 6 and previous, the Twitter application itself has not been designed to view on the iPhone in a landscape point. And whether or not that's something that people care about is kind of interesting, because for Android, this is the Kindle Fire example, and as you can see, the design, I'm going to go to the Android phone in a minute, but what's interesting is that the screen is filled out in both views. So the Kindle, I should say the Android tablets, definitely the application was designed to fill out the screen. You've got the buttons in easily viewable, same location, as well as your menu buttons on the bottom. So this is kind of, well, obviously in the landscape it's on the side, but that's because that's part of the physical device, not part of the displayable screen.
Is this on the left side of the iOS 6, is that for an iPad or for the iPhone?
Oh, that's for both.
Okay. So,
yeah.
Well, on the iPad, they won't let you rotate it either. Oh, I see, they rotate it, but they keep the same size screen. Okay. Yeah, that's very poor.
Yeah. But again, that's, that's probably something they didn't think about when it came to, and again, this is Twitter. This is the Twitter application, not the iPhone or the iPad, right? Yeah, they're not the ones that are designing the software. So again, we're talking about the application designers, not the hardware. So, and that's what we need to think about as far as, when we go ahead and we are testing, that we think about each of the devices, not just one device, which is why I'm showing different examples. I'm showing the iPad, I'm showing the iPhone, I'm showing the Kindle Fire, as well as now the Android phone. And as you can see, with the Android phone, Twitter did put some care into showing or displaying the Twitter page fully, and as a landscape as well as portrait. So, and I found it interesting that the iPhone, it did not, because obviously technically it can do it. It's just that it depends upon which device you're using. So
right. I think you bring up a good, you bring up some
ahead.
really good points here, JeanAnn, and a lot of our clients are asking us, what devices should I test? And so, of course, you've shown the iOS, some of the iOS devices. You've shown some of the Android devices. And so, what we normally do our testing on is I think we have a list of top 10 devices that we use for our clients that we recommend, or they may add some specific devices. But it's really important to know your user group that's going to be using your application, and tailor your application and your testing on those devices for that application. And these simple examples with Twitter, obviously they didn't really, probably, maybe they don't care about being able to view on landscape for iPad and stretching that out. I mean, because they have such huge momentum anyway. But,
Right.
As a lot of our clients are not Twitter, so I think that they probably will care, and they will care on what devices that we do that it's tested on.
And you bring up a really good point about considering the user groups. And again, I go back to, talking to your stakeholders and finding out what they're dealing with, your salespeople, your marketing people. Those groups are really important. Have a group of users that you want to talk to. Go out and talk to your grandmother who might be using the phone, or go out and talk to some of your friends. I talk to my skating friends all the time about stuff like this because I want to know they're not technical people. They're not going to have the same perspective. And I've always done this with my software testing point of view because I'm already skewed. I have such a prejudice that it's over and done with. It's really important for me to get someone's untrained point of view so that I can better understand how they look at things and go, okay, that's an interesting thing. I didn't think of it that way. And I do this all the time. It's something that is a natural habit for me, and I strongly recommend that people do this, that testers do this on a regular basis. And what I'm going to share with you is something that I think all testers should do, whether it's mobile or not. One of my very first days as a software tester was sitting with someone who was using the application, and I had to sit with that person the entire day to see exactly how she was using the application. And it really opened up my eyes to keeping myself open to ideas. And I think this is something that's really important for people to make sure they consider. Definitely try and spend time with users. Watch what they're doing. I came up against a waitress, and she was using a mobile device, taking our orders from the menu. And I went ahead and I was watching her use the application, and it was really interesting to see how she was using it, and I know I wouldn't have used it the same way. So again, you want to make sure you have a unique perspective from your own point of view, but also from someone who's actually using it. These examples right here, I think, show that somebody might use it in a landscape form, and they prefer it that way because for them it's easier to use. But I personally want to see it in the portrait form because I want to see more.
Right. I think you really bring up a good point there, JeanAnn, in that in terms of the users that are using the application, we've worked with medical applications, and so mobile is really changing. It's kind of a paradigm shift on who is using the software. And so, for instance, the user base is much broader, and so you have to be able to accommodate different types of users. We've worked with a lot of medical applications, and so there's a big difference in the way a nurse would use the application and the way a doctor would use the application. Even though it's the same application, the level of expertise, the technical background, all those things are different. So we have to design our applications for doctors as well as nurses, and those kind of things are different.
Well, even just the general interest, considering that someone who calls themselves a geek, a friend of mine who's a baseball player, and he does actually pitch for the Pittsburgh Pirates, he calls himself a geek. Well, he calls himself a geek, a jock and a geek put together. But he says all the time, oh, I use it this way, and I use it, which I look at it and I go, I would never use it that way. Right. But his perspective is very different, but yet he still gets it done. He still gets to use it the way he wants to. And whether or not it's a phone application or a software application on a laptop. And one of the things that we have to consider too is that his wife, for example, has no interest in using the application the same way, but still needs to use the application. You brought up, Phil, about, you know, doctors and nurses. Absolutely, that is the case, that it's the same application and yet different perspectives on how it is used. And that is something that's really important that we need to consider in our tests.
Yeah, we better keep moving, JeanAnn, or we're going to get in trouble from Jan and Amy. Yeah.
Well, we're going to talk a little bit about performance, and yeah, we have a lot to say here, which is something that's really important too. So, you know, one of the first impressions that we get is when we download an application and how easy it is and how it performs in downloading an application. So we definitely want to consider the kinds of tests revolving around downloading and removing applications. Is it easy to remove? We certainly have to consider network communication. How does the application communicate to the outside world? Onboarding database searches. I had a medical device that had its own database, and the searches that it performed, how quickly those searches happened. Keep in mind that these mobile databases are not relational databases, which means that they have to be designed in a particular way to handle quick searches, and not a lot of data is kept because of the lack of resources. So we have to make sure that those searches are designed to work very quickly. And if your application contains a local database, that you'll have to put some extra time in testing those searches. Interrupts and resuming. One of the biggest tests that you definitely should consider is whether or not your application will continue to be used if you get a phone call or if you get a notification. A lot of your local, or I should say your mobile applications have notifications, email, Twitter, and how those notifications appear, whether it's a hardware LED light or whether it's a little icon on the top of the screen. So we want to make sure that your application can handle it. I know for myself, when I'm playing a particular game, we'll use Candy Crush. Everybody knows Candy Crush. And I just recently started this game, which I really am very angry at, but that's another story. The thing is that when it comes to Candy Crush, when I'm playing, I do hear if I get an email notification. However, I don't see it, which I normally would see if I were using another application. So, yes, I get the notification, but I don't see it. I can't access it. So these kinds of things are something that you want to consider with your tests. Do you want the interrupt to be just audible, or do you want it to be visual as well, and is it accessible? Those kinds of things. Can you resume without any problems? And also, and I want to talk about the device itself affecting the performance. If you have charging your device and you're using your application, one of the big problems is the temperature of the device itself heats up very quickly. And I have found this to be the case, and if any of you have heard me speak before, you've heard me tell this story. If you have a phone that is charging and you've got a GPS going and you're talking on the phone, and all of a sudden you get this temperature too hot and everything stops and nothing can be done about this phone, it has to cool off. That happened to a person who was driving in the desert, and she went ahead and she had, it happened to be an iPhone, an older one, older version, so I don't think people have to worry too much anymore. But the point is that these phones and these tablets do get hot, and they get hot with use and they get hot with charging. So you do need to consider these kinds of tests, because your phone or your application will no longer perform. So I'm going to move on from this now, but I did want to definitely speak about those things. Phil, do you have any thoughts on this?
Yeah, I just wanted to kind of repeat a little bit that performance is probably one of the big factors, or one of the largest factors in influencing a user's user experience for a mobile application. So you know, we definitely want to focus on this, and I know that you have, on your first bullet point, you have downloading apps, and I know a lot of your examples coming forth are going to be about that. And downloading an app is really the first impression that a user gets in terms of looking at the performance. So we would, you know, set something that, in terms of the way that you download the app from the App Store, as well as your updates and so forth, really influence the user experience. And the last point I wanted to bring up about this is that, in general terms, and we mentioned this before, in terms of a local application, a hybrid application, or a web application, when you're designing and testing, the location of the data and the way that you do your caching is really important as far as design in influencing the performance. And when we think about mobile performance testing, you know, we usually categorize it in three terms, which are kind of related to the types of applications. And one of them is the local performance of the application on a device, the performance of the network in handling the packets that are going back and forth between the local application and the server, and you mentioned before the performance of the data on the server, and that a lot of times it's not a relational database, so we definitely have to think about the server performance and how the data is organized in terms of layman terms on the server.
Right.
So I'll just let you keep going, JeanAnn, because I think we're going to run out of time, and we need time for questions as well.
Right. I'm going to talk real quick about downloading experience here. Whether or not it's useful information that appears. This is a very quick example of an iPad, and as you can see with the red highlight, or the red square, it shows whether or not what level of downloading, how it's performing. So you can actually visually see what's happening with the downloading experience, and also you can understand when something goes wrong. You'll be able to visually see what goes wrong. So this is something that we want to think about when we're testing. Is this something that we are looking for in our designs? And here is just another example of a KINDLE performance. And we do visually see the before on the right and the during. And then moving forward with the Android phone, you've got, instead of just 2, you have 4 screens, the before, and then as you go down to the bottom right, you'll see that it's giving you the stages of what's happening. So again, there's a very clear progression of the installation. And whether or not it's the iPad, and I didn't get one of the iPhone, I apologize, but what ends up happening is you get to see exactly where the installation is. And I think this is important for understanding how your download performance is happening. And trainability tests, and we're moving a little quickly because we do want to get these last few slides in. So with trainability, users really do need to be able to look things up quickly or be able to figure things out quickly. If they cannot figure out how to use that game that they just downloaded, then they're not going to use it. I know I've done this myself. I've deleted applications that I couldn't figure out easily enough because I thought, well, I don't know what that icon means, and when I press it, it doesn't seem to do anything. And if you're not with mobile in particular, you do not get the online help that you would with a laptop or a desktop because there isn't enough room for resources to be able to house help. So you have to consider these things when you're designing and when you're testing for the user experience. It has to really be something, an application has to be easy to figure out and easy to use. Phil, did you want to make a comment?
No, I think you've pretty much hit on it pretty well, JeanAnn.
Okay, great. All right, so we're moving on. So here's something, this is a quick explanation now. One of the things that I liked about the iPad is the fact that on the right, you'll see that it discusses, it says what's happening. And this is a Twitter page that, you know, to actually tweet something. And what I liked about it is that it actually tells you where to type by saying what's happening. So you figure out easily enough, oh, if I start typing, I do it. Now with the screenshot on the left, you've got the cursor there. So yes, you can figure it out, but I think it's the iPhone on the right and the iPad on the left. And I just like the iPhone better with the what's happening. Again, considering the type of user you would have in that the user is probably less educated with technology, which is why they have an iPhone, because it's easier to use, better user experience. And the iPad, I'm not sure why they don't have it there. It's kind of an interesting difference. But if you notice with the Android, you just get the cursor. And you get a blank screen. No, you do get the cursor on the Kindle. So the buttons are there. You know, everything seems to make sense in terms of the pictures look similar. You can figure things out. But I just like the difference in the fact that on the iPhone itself, it has the what's happening. I thought that was a pretty cool little design. And it's one thing I do want to point out here is that if you notice the difference, the iPhone is slightly different than the iPad. And why would that be is my question to the Apple people. Why would you make it different in something like this? This is a pretty simple difference. So make sure you consider your tests. And I shouldn't say it's the Apple people. I'm sorry. It's the Twitter people. Why? They're the ones that designed this. So why did they have a difference between how it works on the iPad versus how it works on the iPhone in terms of text? That's a very strange thing to me. So, Phil, did you have a comment?
Yeah, just on the trainability, and actually I call it learnability, but you know, in trainability, actually one of the things that we really need to think about is that you know, back in the 70s, 80s, 90s, we had training for we were releasing a new application, and we had official training, and we had manuals and so forth, and now there is no training. And so, you know, your user really has to be able to figure it out right away because there is no training. And so being intuitive, being consistent in your placement of your buttons and so forth really helps a user be able to learn your application very quickly.
And yeah, one of the things that, you know, because we don't have that tutorial, that onboard tutorial, well, again, it's a lack of resources. We can have a tutorial on our laptop and desktop versions, but that's because there is a lot more storage available and a lot more memory. You don't get that with mobile, and you really need to make sure to make your applications appear very simple and easy to use and to figure out. Okay, so basically the conclusion is, you know, testing the user experience with whether or not it's useful, whether or not it's easy to find things, how desirable it would be. And again, I wanted to mention, and Phil, I really liked what you had said about quantifying those words, making it easy to understand what we're testing. So we have something that we can look at and use as a measurement to our tests and our user experience.
Right, a way to improve.
Yes, absolutely. So this is my contact information, and you will get a presentation, the presentation in an email. So I'm not going to leave this too long because we have references I included, and so we're going to go ahead. I'm going to leave this as this screen here. And who's taking over?
Can you hear me, JeanAnn and Phil?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
We have a question. How to test on different types of iPads, Androids, iPhones, which have different layouts, and what if I only have one device, one iPad, one iPhone, one Android? How do I test then?
Well, there is a way to access different types of devices. Device Anywhere, I know, has a wide selection of devices that you can sign up for an account. I don't believe it's free. It's a service that they provide, but you can go ahead and do your tests on these devices. It's using it basically through a network connection, but you have control of that device and you view it on your screen, so you can see what's going on with that device while you have control of it as well. So you can conduct your test that way, which means, of course, that you're not having to need to have all these different types of devices in your lab. So it's a nice service, but again, it's something that you're going to have to purchase that account.
What was the name again?
Right. I mean,
Device Anywhere is one. I believe Perfecto Mobile is another company that provides this service. I know there are more, but those are the two that come to my mind.
right. I mean, I think that those were the two initial vendors that came out with that kind of service, and there are others that are entering the market now with different features. I think in a broader sense, especially because the barriers to entry for a mobile application developer are very low, you may have an application and really only have 2 devices to test on. And so, of course, you can't test on every device, but I think that if you got, say, the top 10 devices, you would be able to cover 90% of the market. And so that gets back to what we mentioned earlier about thinking about what your market is, the
Right.
users that you're trying to reach, and so thinking about that. And then there's the 3 ways. One of them is, of course, buying the devices or using a company that has the real devices and using their services, or using the service like you mentioned, JeanAnn, in terms of Device Anywhere or Perfecto Mobile. But firstly, those kind of testing services and I guess you could say remotely renting devices,
Yes.
sometimes those services are not as cheap as you think they are. And secondly is that depending on the type of tests and application that you have, you may not be able to run the type of tests that you want to do using those devices remotely. And
Absolutely, and
Yeah.
that's something I do want to focus on, is
Right.
that people tend to think, oh, well, just the cloud, or I'll just go ahead and I'll do the automation and emulators, using emulators.
Right.
Those are great for certain types of tests, but you do need to make sure to understand not all tests are really good to do
Right.
through emulators and through other services.
Sure.
You still need the device.
Right. So what you have to do is you have to think about those 3 ways, right? Renting devices,
Yes.
using real devices, and using emulators. And think about it kind of a matrix as to what kind of functions can we test
Right.
on emulators, real devices, and rented
Yeah.
devices.
I talk all the time about planning out your tests and understanding what kinds of tests you want to do. And people tend to gloss over that a little bit. It is really important to take the time so that you are not wasting money on things like services that you probably don't really need. or even purchasing a device that you may not need. You may be able to get away with just going ahead and using the service for one particular test for one particular device and then moving forward with other things. So be very wise in taking the time to plan out your tests.
Right. Do we answer? I think we more than answered the question.
Yeah.
Is there any more?
Yes, we're about 5 minutes over. Is it okay?
Are there more questions?
Yes. Symbian,
Okay.
Nokia had lead devices on which we used to test. Do Android phones also suggest any lead devices?
I guess I'd need to think about what the meaning of lead is. You mean like main devices, or?
I
think.
I'm not sure.
Symbian and who else?
It says Symbian, parentheses, Nokia, had lead devices on which we used to test. Do Android phones also suggest any lead devices? Also, please share the list of top 10 devices.
Okay.
Oh.
Yeah, I think that Android certainly, the market has changed.
Yeah.
When Nokia was dominant, they could say that you had to test these devices, and they actually had test kits and so forth. But now that things are more open, I really don't think that Google or Android would say test these devices, because that would show affinity towards a certain vendor that they're working with. So they don't really do that. But you just have to go with the market and think about what the market is doing and test those particular ones. I think right now we know that we have the three to four major handset vendors for Android, being HTC, Samsung, and Motorola. Testing, say, the 2 to 3 devices from each of those vendors would probably cover it.
And the other point is to think about, again, your user base. What kinds of, do a survey and find out what kinds of phones are in your geographic location or in a certain demographic that you want to consider, that you would consider. For example, the medical device, or maybe a medical application like blood pressure. If that's the type of application you're using, well, what kinds of devices would someone who would be using that application, what kinds of devices would they use? You'll end up finding that there are very distinct demographics, statistics that you can pull upon for answering your question.
Yeah, as far as the top 10 devices, Amy, I don't have a little wallet card that I can pull out and list them out.
Right.
But we can put that on our blog or on Facebook or something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. There are some other questions, but maybe JeanAnn, I could just send them to you, and then we can figure out a way to get the information out there to these people.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Okay. Well, great. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, JeanAnn, so much, and thank you to everyone who attended. And look for your email with the link to YouTube and SlideShare for this presentation. Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.